Case 1, Michelle Martens. The birthday. 2nd Judicial District Court, Bernalillo County, Albuquerque, New Mexico. August 23, 2016. There are dates that stay with investigators for the rest of their careers. Dates that follow them home at the end of a shift. Dates that wake them up at 3 in the morning, years after the case has closed, without warning and without apology. For the detectives of the Albuquerque Police Department, August 23, 2016 is exactly that kind of date. It was a Tuesday. It was also the 10th birthday of a little girl named Victoria Martens. Victoria should have woken up that morning the way every child wakes up on their birthday, with that particular electricity that only belongs to children, that sense that today is somehow different from all the other days, that today the world is just a little more yours than it usually is. She should have been thinking about cake, about candles, about whatever small and beautiful celebration a 10-year-old girl dreams about when she imagines her special day. She should have been thinking about the next decade of her life stretching out ahead of her like an open road full of possibility. Instead, what happened to Victoria Martens on her 10th birthday is something that investigators later described as among the most horrific crimes ever committed against a child in the history of the state of New Mexico. And the person at the very center of it was her own mother. Michelle Martens was 35 years old in the summer of 2016. She lived in an apartment on the 4000 block of Tierra Amarilla Northwest in Albuquerque, in a working-class neighborhood of a city that has long wrestled with poverty, addiction, and the particular kind of quiet desperation that settles into a community when the systems meant to support it have consistently failed. From the outside, she was simply a woman raising her daughter. Behind closed doors, she was something else entirely. On the night of August 23, 2016, Victoria's 10th birthday, Albuquerque police responded to a call at the apartment. What officers encountered when they entered that unit was so profoundly disturbing that multiple responding officers required critical incident counseling in the days that followed. Victoria Martens was dead. She had been sexually assaulted. She had been murdered. Her small body had been dismembered, and investigators determined that attempts had been made to burn her remains inside the apartment itself. She was 10 years old. It was her birthday. 3 people were taken into custody in connection with Victoria's murder: her mother Michelle Martens, Michelle's boyfriend Fabian Gonzalez, and a woman named Jessica Kelly. All 3 had been present in the apartment during the time Victoria died. As the investigation deepened over the following weeks and months, the picture that emerged was not one that anyone who cared about children could look at without profound grief and anger. Michelle Martens had not only failed to protect her daughter. Investigators found evidence suggesting she had been present during the assault on her own child and had not intervened. The case sent shockwaves far beyond the city of Albuquerque. It traveled across the state, across the country, and into national news cycles, not only because of the sheer horror of what had been done to a 10-year-old girl on her birthday, but because of the questions that immediately followed the initial shock. Questions that were legitimate, important, and utterly agonizing to sit with. How did no one know? How does a child live inside conditions this dangerous, inside a home environment this toxic and this neglectful, without a single person in the outside world noticing and stepping in? Where were the neighbors? Where were the teachers? Where were the child welfare workers? The Victoria Martens case did not begin on the night of August 23, 2016. It began long before that night, in the accumulation of warning signs and missed opportunities that allowed a little girl to remain in a home where she was not safe. Those questions would haunt New Mexico's child welfare system for years. In the 2nd Judicial District Court of Bernalillo County, before Judge Cindy Leos, Michelle Martens eventually entered a guilty plea to 1 count of reckless child abuse resulting in death. The plea agreement, while sparing the community a lengthy trial and its attendant public recounting of the most harrowing details, also meant that the full scope of what was done to Victoria on her birthday was never laid out completely in open court. Martens was sentenced to 12 years in prison, a sentence that many in Albuquerque and across New Mexico regarded as shockingly inadequate given what her daughter had endured. Jessica Kelly, who entered an Alford plea to first-degree murder, received a far more substantial sentence. Fabian Gonzalez's case moved through the courts separately, with its own complicated legal proceedings and outcomes. There is one final detail about this case that is almost impossible to process without stopping completely. Michelle Martens was released from custody on October 14, 2025. She served approximately 9 years. Victoria Martens, her daughter, never got to be 11. In the years since Victoria's death, her name has become a reference point in New Mexico's ongoing conversation about child protective services, about mandatory reporting, about the state's responsibility to intervene when children are living in dangerous conditions. Advocates have spoken her name at legislative hearings. Proposed reforms have been attached to her memory. People who never once met her have wept over her story on social media and in community meetings across the state. But no reform, no hearing, no legislative session, no courtroom sentence, however long or short, can give Victoria Martens back the birthday that was stolen from her, or the 9 more birthdays she never got to have, or the entire life that ended before it had barely begun. Her name was Victoria Martens. She was 10 years old on her birthday in her own home, and she deserved so much better than every single thing she got. If this case moved you, if you believe Victoria's name deserves to be remembered and her story deserves to be heard, please take a moment right now to hit that like button, drop a comment below with Victoria's name, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour so you never miss a story that matters. Your support means these children are never forgotten. Case 2, Ariana Vigil. The smoke in the room. First Judicial District Court, Rio Arriba County, Española, New Mexico. April 1, 2025. There is a particular kind of grief that settles over a community when a baby dies. It is different from other grief. It is heavier, sharper, and accompanied by a specific kind of outrage that comes from the understanding that an infant, by definition, is entirely helpless. An infant cannot leave. An infant cannot ask for help. An infant cannot call 911 or flag down a neighbor or walk out the front door. An infant can only survive or not survive based entirely on the decisions of the adults responsible for them. In Española, New Mexico, a small city of about 6,000 people nestled in the high desert of Rio Arriba County in northern New Mexico, a region that has for decades carried the devastating distinction of having one of the highest drug overdose death rates in the entire United States. That specific, heavy grief descended on the morning of April 1, 2025. A 15-month-old baby girl was dead. Her mother was 26-year-old Ariana Vigil. The story of what happened in the home of Ariana Vigil in the days leading up to April 1, 2025, is a story that has become heartbreakingly familiar in communities across New Mexico that have been ravaged by the fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid that is approximately 100 times more potent than morphine, has carved a path of destruction through New Mexico's families that is difficult to overstate. It has emptied households. It has orphaned children. It has ended lives with a swiftness that leaves families reeling. And in the Vigil home, it had made its presence known in a way that would cost a 15-month-old child everything. According to investigators with the Española Police Department and the Rio Arriba County Sheriff's Office, Ariana Vigil had been smoking fentanyl inside the home she shared with her toddler daughter. In the course of their investigation, officers discovered burnt aluminum foil on the floor of Vigil's bedroom, the signature residue of fentanyl use. The foil was not tucked away in a drawer or locked in a cabinet. It was on the bedroom floor, accessible, in a home where a 15-month-old child was crawling, toddling, and exploring the world the way all children that age do, by putting everything they encounter directly into their mouths, by touching surfaces and then touching their faces, by existing fully in a space that had been contaminated by a substance lethal enough to kill an adult with an accidental exposure. A 15-month-old baby girl had no chance. The child was found unresponsive. First responders transported her immediately, but the damage had already been done. She died from fentanyl exposure. She was 15 months old. She was at the age when most babies are just beginning to walk, just beginning to form their first words, just beginning to understand that the world is a place full of people who will take care of them. The autopsy and toxicological results confirmed what investigators had suspected from the moment they saw that burnt foil on the bedroom floor. Fentanyl exposure had killed the baby. Ariana Vigil was charged in the First Judicial District Court of Rio Arriba County with child abuse resulting in death and possession of a controlled substance. According to prosecutors, Vigil admitted in statements to investigators that she had been smoking fentanyl and that the burnt foil found in her bedroom was consistent with her own drug use. The admission, the acknowledgement that she had used fentanyl in a home with a 15-month-old child and left its residue within reach of that child, is the kind of detail that sits in the chest like a stone. It is important here to be precise about what happened, because precision matters when we talk about the intersection of addiction and child safety. Addiction is a disease. The state of New Mexico, like every other state in America, has spent years wrestling with how to balance the treatment of addiction with the protection of children living inside homes where addiction is present. Ariana Vigil was a woman in the grip of a fentanyl addiction, a substance so powerfully addictive that medical professionals consistently describe it as among the most difficult substances in the world to stop using without intensive, sustained intervention. But Ariana Vigil was also a mother, and on April 1, 2025, her 15-month-old daughter paid the ultimate price for the choices being made inside that home. In Rio-Arriaga County, a place that has buried more residents to drug overdose than almost any other county in the United States, this case became yet another data point in a crisis that shows no sign of ending. Community advocates, law enforcement officers, and child welfare workers who have spent careers in this region speak about the fentanyl epidemic with a kind of exhausted, grief-stricken urgency that goes beyond statistics. They talk about children, about specific children, about a 15-month-old girl who cannot be brought back. As of our most recent research for this episode, charges against Ariana Vigil in the First Judicial District Court of Rio-Arriaga County remain active, with the case moving through the New Mexico judicial system. She faces serious prison time if convicted. But a courtroom conviction, whatever form it ultimately takes, cannot answer the question that lingers over every case like this one. The question is simple, and it is devastating. What would it have taken to save that baby girl before April 1, 2025? What intervention, what resource, what community support, what system of accountability might have placed a different set of circumstances in front of Ariana Vigil before that night? We do not know the answer to that question. What we know is that a 15-month-old baby is gone. And in Española, New Mexico, a community that has already endured so much loss, her absence is one more wound that will not quickly heal. If this story has affected you, if you want to make sure that the story of this baby girl and every child on this list tonight is never forgotten, please like this video right now, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Every view, every share, every subscription is how we keep these stories alive and these conversations going. Case 3, Alexis Avila. Left in the cold. 5th Judicial District Court, Lea County, Hobbs, New Mexico. January 7, 2022. It was early evening on January 7, 2022, in the parking lot behind the Broadmoor Shopping Center in Hobbs, New Mexico. Hobbs is a small oil country city in the southeastern corner of the state, sitting just miles from the Texas border, in the flat, windswept high desert of Lea County. It is not a place where extraordinary things happen very often. It is a place where people go to work, raise families, and live lives that are quiet by design. On January 7, 2022, a woman walked across that parking lot, dropped something into a dumpster, and walked away. What she dropped was her newborn son. Alexis Avila was 18 years old. She had hidden her pregnancy, by the accounts of those who knew her, with enough success that the birth of her child came as a shock to her family and community when the full story eventually emerged. On the evening of January 7, 2022, she gave birth. And then, rather than calling for medical help, rather than surrendering the baby at one of New Mexico's safe haven locations, which, under New Mexico's safe haven law, allows a parent to surrender a newborn at a hospital, fire station, or police station within 90 days of birth, no questions asked, with complete legal immunity. She placed her newborn son in a trash bag and dropped him into a dumpster behind a shopping center in the cold night air of a January evening in southeastern New Mexico. The baby was alive when he went into that dumpster. By what can only be described as a miracle of timing and human decency, a passerby heard something from inside the dumpster not long after Avila walked away. What the person heard was a sound that does not belong inside a dumpster in a shopping center parking lot on a January night. It was the cry of a newborn baby. The person did not hesitate. They called 911, and first responders arrived to find the baby, wrapped in a trash bag, exposed to the cold, but alive. The newborn was transported to a local hospital and later transferred to a facility with a higher level of neonatal care. He survived. Against extraordinary odds, that baby boy survived. Investigators quickly identified Alexis Avila as the person who had placed the baby in the dumpster, in part through surveillance footage from the shopping center's security cameras and in part through the swift, determined work of Hobbs Police Department detectives and Lea County investigators. Avila was arrested and charged with attempted first-degree murder and intentional child abuse resulting in great bodily harm. The case went to trial in the 5th Judicial District Court of Lea County before Judge William G.W. Shubrich. Prosecutors from the Lea County District Attorney's Office, led by District Attorney Diana Luce, presented the surveillance footage, medical testimony, and investigative findings to a jury. The defense argued various mitigating factors related to Avila's age and her mental state at the time of the birth. But on April 14, 2023, the jury returned its verdict. Alexis Avila was found guilty of attempted first-degree murder and child abuse resulting in great bodily harm. On May 1, 2023, Judge Shubrich sentenced Alexis Avila to 16 years in the New Mexico Corrections Department. The sentence was met with a complex mix of reactions across New Mexico and across the country. Some felt it was appropriate given that she had intentionally placed a living infant in a dumpster to die. Others, pointing to Avila's age at the time of the crime, the absence of prenatal care, and the broader systemic failures around reproductive health access in rural southeastern New Mexico, argued that the case raised questions that a criminal sentence alone could not answer. Avila appealed her conviction, and the case eventually made its way to the New Mexico Supreme Court. On January 17, 2026, almost exactly 4 years after that night in the parking lot, the New Mexico Supreme Court declined to overturn the conviction. The 16-year sentence stands. The baby boy, the child who was left in that dumpster on a January night and survived, was placed with family members according to reports from child welfare agencies involved in his case. He is alive. He is growing up somewhere in New Mexico. He will one day, presumably, learn the full story of the night he entered the world. What that child carries, what that knowledge will mean to him when he is old enough to fully absorb it, is something only he will ever truly understand. But what the rest of us can understand, what the rest of us owe him, at the very minimum, is the acknowledgement that he mattered from the very first moment of his life, even in the moments when the person responsible for him chose to act as though he did not. He mattered then. He matters now. And the fact that a stranger heard him crying in a dumpster and made a phone call is the reason he is alive today. In the story of this little boy's life, that unnamed stranger is a hero. Full stop. If this story gave you chills, if you found yourself holding your breath during any part of it, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. We cover real cases, real victims, and real justice, and your support makes every single episode possible. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Case 4, Vanessa-Chavez. While her brother watched. 2nd Judicial District Court, Bernalillo County, Albuquerque, New Mexico. August 2, 2025. There are moments in true crime investigation where a single detail, one specific, heartbreaking detail, reframes everything else about a case and makes it impossible to approach the story with anything other than complete, raw grief. In the case of Vanessa-Chavez, that detail is this. When investigators arrived at the scene on August 2, 2025, there was a 7-year-old boy in that apartment. He was the victim's brother. He had seen everything. Vanessa-Chavez was 40 years old and lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in a home where 2 of her children, an 18-month-old baby girl and her 7-year-old brother, also lived. On August 2, 2025, according to court documents and the findings of Albuquerque Police Department investigators, Vanessa-Chavez took her 18-month-old daughter and slammed the child's head against a wall with enough force to cause fatal injuries. The baby girl died. The 7-year-old boy was in the home when it happened. He witnessed it. And in the days that followed, as investigators worked to reconstruct exactly what had occurred inside that apartment, his account, The account of a 7-year-old child who had watched his baby sister be killed became part of the evidence that prosecutors would use in building their case against his mother. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with it. A 7-year-old child, old enough to understand that something terrible was happening, not old enough to stop it or protect his baby sister, old enough to carry the memory of it for the rest of his life. Vanessa Chavez was arrested and charged on August 6, 2025, 4 days after the baby girl's death, with intentional child abuse resulting in death, a first-degree felony under New Mexico law that carries a potential sentence of life in prison. She was booked into the Bernalillo County Metropolitan Detention Center and was held without bond, a determination made by the court based on the severity of the alleged crime and the risk that Chavez posed to the community. The case was picked up by the 2nd Judicial District Court in Bernalillo County, the same courthouse that has seen some of New Mexico's most serious and most heartbreaking crimes against children over the past several decades. Prosecutors from the Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office began assembling the evidence that would form the foundation of the state's case against Chavez. The details that investigators released in the days following the arrest painted a picture of an act of violence so extreme, so disproportionate to anything a reasoning adult could justify, that the question of what drove Vanessa Chavez to do what she allegedly did on August 2, 2025, became a central focus of public discussion and media coverage in Albuquerque in the weeks that followed. An 18-month-old baby. That is what Vanessa Chavez's daughter was. 18 months. Not yet old enough to have a full vocabulary. Not yet old enough to have formed more than the earliest, most foundational memories of her short life. At 18 months, a child is entirely dependent on the adults around her for every single element of her survival. She cannot protect herself from anything. She can only trust, in the way that very young children trust, completely and without reservation, that the people taking care of her will not hurt her. That trust was catastrophically misplaced. As of the most recent court records available at the time of this episode's production, the case of Vanessa Chavez in the 2nd Judicial District Court of Bernalillo County was actively moving through the New Mexico judicial system. No trial date had been set, and Chavez remained held without bond in the Bernalillo County Metropolitan Detention Center. She has entered a not guilty plea. But somewhere in Albuquerque, New Mexico, there is a 7-year-old boy who woke up on August 2, 2025, with a baby sister and went to sleep that night without one. He is being cared for, we are told, by other family members. He is in school somewhere. He is growing up. He is carrying something that no child should ever have to carry. Whatever happens in that Bernalillo County courtroom, whatever verdict a jury ultimately renders, and whatever sentence a judge ultimately imposes, none of it will be designed to help that 7-year-old boy process what he saw. That work, the long, difficult, ongoing work of helping a child survive the unsurvivable, will fall to the adults around him who love him. We hope, with everything we have, that those adults are there and that they are capable of giving him what he needs. He deserves it. His baby sister deserved it. And the state of New Mexico owes both of them a justice system that takes what happened on August 2, 2025, with the full seriousness it demands. If this story is hitting you hard, and we believe it should, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. We tell these stories because these children deserve to be more than a headline. Your support keeps this channel going and keeps these names in front of the world where they belong. Case 5. Sonia Cristal Jimenez. Born at Bern Lake. 3rd Judicial District Court, Dona Ana County, Las Cruces, New Mexico. February 7, 2026. Bern Lake is a small recreational lake on the eastern edge of Las Cruces, New Mexico, surrounded by cottonwood trees and desert scrub, used by locals for fishing, walking, and spending time outdoors in the clear, dry air of southern New Mexico. It is an ordinary, unremarkable place in the best possible sense, a community space where nothing particularly dramatic is supposed to happen. On February 7, 2026, something happened at Bern Lake that changed the way residents of Las Cruces and Dona Ana County would think about that particular stretch of land forever. Sonia Cristal Jimenez was 38 years old. According to the investigation conducted by Las Cruces Police Department detectives in coordination with the Dona Ana County Sheriff's Office, Jimenez went to Bern Lake on February 7, 2026, while in active labor. She gave birth to a baby girl at the lake. She cut the umbilical cord herself. And then, rather than calling for help, rather than getting that newborn child to a hospital, rather than doing any one of the dozens of things a person with access to a phone and a functioning conscience could have done in that moment, she placed her newborn daughter inside the holding tank of a portable toilet located near the lake. The baby drowned. The Office of the Medical Investigator for the State of New Mexico conducted a full autopsy. The findings were unambiguous. The baby girl had been alive, breathing, viable, a human being with a heartbeat and functioning lungs, when she was placed inside that portable toilet tank. She drowned in that tank. She died in that tank. She was less than 1 hour old. Investigators were alerted to the situation through a combination of witness accounts and the physical evidence discovered near the lake. The investigation moved quickly, and Sonia Cristal Jimenez was identified as the person who had given birth at Burn Lake. She was arrested and charged in the 3rd Judicial District Court of Dona Ana County with intentional child abuse resulting in death, a charge that reflects the state's legal determination that what happened to that baby girl was not an accident, not a tragic consequence of a medical emergency, but an intentional act by a woman who chose to end her newborn daughter's life rather than seek help. The charging documents, as confirmed by the city of Las Cruces in an official press release and reported by the Albuquerque Journal, Fox News, KOB, and multiple other outlets, leave very little room for ambiguity. The baby was alive. She was placed in the tank. She drowned. The sequence of events, as laid out by investigators, describes a deliberate act of abandonment that resulted in the death of a newborn child. It is impossible to discuss this case without also discussing what New Mexico law specifically provides for in exactly this kind of situation. New Mexico's safe haven law, one of the most permissive in the country, explicitly allows a parent to surrender a newborn infant at a hospital, fire station, or police station within 90 days of birth. No questions asked. No criminal charges. Complete legal immunity. The law exists precisely because the state of New Mexico has determined, as a matter of public policy, that it is better to give a parent an anonymous, judgment-free exit than to have newborns die in parking lots, dumpsters, and portable toilet tanks. Sonia Cristal Jimenez was 38 years old. She was not a teenager in crisis with no knowledge of her options. She was an adult woman who made a choice, and the choice she made cost her newborn daughter her life before that baby had been in the world for 60 minutes. The 3rd Judicial District Court in Dona Ana County received the case in February 2026, and as of the time of this episode's production, the case is actively moving through the New Mexico court system. Jimenez faces serious prison time if convicted on the child abuse resulting in death charge. Las Cruces is a city of roughly 114,000 people, the second largest city in New Mexico, a community defined in many ways by its proximity to the U.S.-Mexico border, by the presence of New Mexico State University, and by the particular mix of cultures and histories that makes southern New Mexico one of the most interesting and complex regions in the entire American Southwest. It is a community of neighbors, of families, of people who know each other and look out for each other and gather at places like Burn Lake to simply breathe and be together. On February 7, 2026, a baby girl was born at Burn Lake and died at Burn Lake. She did not get a name announced to the public. She did not get a birth certificate with a future attached to it. She got less than an hour in this world. And the person who was supposed to be her first and most essential protector made a choice that ensured those few minutes would be all she ever had. That baby girl deserved better. She deserved the entire world. If this case has affected you, please don't scroll past without taking 1 second to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Every subscriber tells us that these stories matter, that these children matter, and that their names and their stories deserve to be kept alive. Thank you for being here tonight. Case 6, Mariah Zuni. The Pueblo, United States District Court for the District of New Mexico, Federal Court, Albuquerque. March 21, 2024. The Isleta Pueblo sits a few miles south of Albuquerque, along the Rio Grande, in a landscape that is simultaneously ancient and alive. The Pueblo of Isleta is a federally recognized sovereign tribal nation with a history stretching back centuries before the arrival of European colonizers. Its people have maintained their language, their traditions, their governance structures, and their deep connection to the land across generations of extraordinary pressure and change. It is a community with genuine pride, genuine strength, and a genuine sense of what it means to belong to something larger than any individual. On the morning of March 21st, 2024, that community was shattered. Mariah Zuni was 32 years old. She lived on the Isleta Pueblo with her 2 young sons, a 5-year-old boy and a 9-month-old baby. On March 21st, 2024, according to the federal criminal complaint filed by the United States Attorney for the District of New Mexico, Zuni used a bread knife to slit the throats of both of her children in their home on the Pueblo. The 5-year-old and the 9-month-old baby. Both children died. Tribal law enforcement officers from the Isleta Pueblo responded to the home and discovered the 2 boys. The scene they encountered is not one we will describe in full detail here, out of respect for the community and the dignity of those 2 children. What we will say is that the federal criminal complaint filed in the days that followed described evidence of a brutal, deliberate, fatal attack on 2 children who could not protect themselves, carried out by the one person in the world they trusted most completely. Because this crime occurred on federally recognized tribal land, jurisdiction fell to federal authorities rather than state prosecutors. The case was investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and prosecuted by the United States Attorney's Office for the District of New Mexico under Alexander Ubalez. Mariah Zuni was transported to federal custody and charged in the United States District Court for the District of New Mexico, the federal courthouse in Albuquerque, with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Her initial appearance was before U.S. Magistrate Judge Curtin Calsa. 2 counts of first-degree murder. 2 children. 1 mother. The case drew immediate attention from the Department of Justice, which issued an official press release confirming the charges and expressing the federal government's commitment to pursuing the case aggressively. The Albuquerque Journal, KOB, KRQE, ABQ Raw, and the Regional News Bulletin all covered the story with the prominence it demanded. Within the Isleta Pueblo community, the reaction was one of grief too deep for easy expression. A community that had already weathered generations of hardship, the dispossession of land, the trauma of forced assimilation, the ongoing challenges of economic marginalization on many tribal lands across the American West, now had to absorb the death of 2 of its smallest members at the hands of their mother. Community leaders spoke carefully, as community leaders in situations like this must. They asked for privacy. They asked for prayers. They reached out to tribal support services and to the broader network of resources available to tribal nations dealing with crisis. A 5-year-old boy, a 9-month-old baby, gone. In the months following the March 21, 2024 killings, Mariah Zuni was held in federal detention pending trial. She was held in Valencia County while her case moved through the federal judicial process. If convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder in federal court, she faces mandatory life in prison without the possibility of parole. The federal system does not offer parole. If convicted, Mariah Zuni will spend the rest of her natural life inside a federal correctional facility. As of the time of this episode's production, the case remained before the United States District Court for the District of New Mexico, with proceedings continuing under federal jurisdiction. There is something particularly important to acknowledge in discussing a case like this one, in a community like the Isleta Pueblo. The crime Mariah Zuni is accused of committing is one that exists in a context of historical trauma, of intergenerational challenges, of systems that have often failed indigenous communities in ways that are well documented and deeply serious. None of that context excuses what allegedly happened on March 21, 2024. Nothing excuses it. But understanding it fully requires us to look at the whole picture, to acknowledge that the conditions in which people make catastrophic choices do not arise in a vacuum. What happened in that home on the Isleta Pueblo on March 21, 2024, was a tragedy so profound that it echoes across the entire state of New Mexico and raises questions about what communities need, what resources, what mental health support, what crisis intervention, to prevent mornings like that one from ever happening again. 2 little boys deserve to grow up. They deserve to fish in the Rio Grande and run through the desert and learn their language and carry their culture forward. They deserved everything, and they got none of it. Please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour if you haven't already. We carry these stories because every single child on this list tonight deserves to be more than a case number. Your support makes sure they aren't. Case 7. Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez. She blamed her son. 2nd Judicial District Court, Bernalillo County, Albuquerque, New Mexico. March 4, 2022. Sentencing May 2025. Not every case on tonight's list involves the death of a young child. But every case involves a profound, devastating betrayal by a mother. A choice that caused immeasurable harm to someone who had every right to expect protection. The case of Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez is different from the others in its mechanics. It is not the story of a mother who harmed her own young child directly. It is the story of a mother who committed a murder, and then, when confronted with the consequences of that murder, turned to her own teenage son and allowed him to take the blame for it. Let that settle for a moment. She shot and killed someone, and then she pointed at her child and said, in effect, it was him. Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez was 49 years old on the night of March 4, 2022. The events of that night unfolded in an alley behind Lindy's Diner, a well-known downtown Albuquerque landmark that has occupied its spot in the heart of the city for decades. Lindy's is a classic diner, the kind of place that exists in every American city and that regular customers feel a genuine affection for. It is not the kind of place associated with violence. On March 4, 2022, 16-year-old Josue Ruiz was in that alley behind Lindy's Diner. Josue was a teenager, 16 years old, and he had a relationship with the daughter of Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez. The specific dynamics of that relationship, why Ortiz-Chavez had such profound animosity toward the young man her daughter was involved with, what led to the confrontation that ended in the alley behind Lindy's Diner, were explored in the investigation and court proceedings that followed. What is documented and confirmed in court records is this. Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez shot Josue Ruiz in that alley on March 4, 2022. He was 16 years old. He died from the gunshot wound. And then Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez did something that takes the moral calculation of this case to an entirely different level. Rather than taking responsibility for what she had done, rather than surrendering to police, or even simply remaining silent, she actively allowed suspicion to fall on her own teenage son. The investigation initially proceeded in a direction that placed her son in the crosshairs of a murder investigation. A teenager, her child, the person she was supposed to protect above all others, was treated as a suspect in a murder his own mother had committed. The depth of that betrayal is difficult to fully articulate. She did not simply fail to protect him. She actively used him as a shield. She allowed him to face the possibility of being charged with a murder he did not commit. She looked at her own child and decided that her freedom was worth more than his innocence. Albuquerque Police Department investigators, working methodically through the evidence, eventually determined the truth. Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez was identified as the shooter. She was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the 2nd Judicial District Court of Bernalillo County. The case moved through the legal system over the following years. On January 15, 2025, Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder before Judge Lucy Solomon in the 2nd Judicial District Court. The plea represented a negotiated outcome between prosecutors from the Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office and Ortiz-Chavez defense team. On May 1, 2025, Judge Solomon sentenced Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez to 18 years in the New Mexico Corrections Department. 18 years for shooting a 16-year-old boy in an alley. 18 years for allowing her own son to be investigated for the crime she committed. 18 years. Josue Ruiz's family, who had already endured the unsurvivable loss of a 16-year-old son and brother, had to further endure years of legal proceedings before arriving at that sentence. The family of the teenager who was initially under suspicion, who was, it must be emphasized again, Elizabeth Ortiz-Chavez's own child, had to live through a period of profound and unjust legal jeopardy before the truth was established and he was cleared. The Albuquerque community reacted to this case with a particular, specific kind of anger that is different from the anger generated by random violence. This was not a stranger harming a stranger. This was a mother shooting her daughter's teenage boyfriend and then using her own son as cover for the crime. The concentric circles of betrayal, the betrayal of Josue Ruiz, the betrayal of his family, the betrayal of her own children, the betrayal of every person in that downtown Albuquerque neighborhood who expects the streets to be safe, made this case one of the most morally complex and emotionally disturbing in recent Bernalillo County history. People magazine, Law and Crime, and KRQE all covered the case extensively. True Crime News brought it to a national true crime audience. But here on Cold Case Hour, we want to make sure it is told with the full weight it deserves, not as a curiosity, not as a tabloid item, but as the story of a 16-year-old boy named Josue Ruiz who was killed in an alley behind a diner and whose death was compounded by one of the most cynical acts of self-preservation a mother can commit. His name was Josue Ruiz. He was 16 years old. He deserved to finish growing up. If you're watching Cold Case Hour for the first time tonight, we want to welcome you to this community. Please subscribe, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment letting us know your thoughts on this case. Your engagement helps this channel reach more people and keeps these stories in front of the world where they belong. Case 8. Synthia Varela-Casaus. Omari called for help. 2nd Judicial District Court, Bernalillo County, Albuquerque, New Mexico. December 27, 2013. Sentenced May 6, 2016. Before we tell the story of what happened to 9-year-old Omari Varela on December 27, 2013, we need to tell you about a phone call. The phone call happened approximately 6 months before Omari died. 6 months before the night that would end his life, Omari Varela, 9 years old, a child who clearly understood on some fundamental level that the situation in his home was dangerous and wrong, picked up a phone and dialed 911. He called for help. 911 calls made by children are among the most difficult audio recordings in the entire landscape of true crime documentation. There is something about the voice of a child, the pitch of it, the vulnerability embedded in every syllable, the heartbreaking combination of fear and hope that a child brings to the act of reaching out to an adult for protection, that cuts through every professional distance and hits something raw and essential in every person who listens. Omari Varela's 911 call is exactly that kind of recording. He called. He asked for help. The system received his call, and then the system failed him. What happened next? The exact nature of the response to Omari's 911 call, the decisions made by the adults who received it, the follow-up that did or did not occur in the weeks and months between that call and December 27, 2013, became one of the central, agonizing questions in the public reckoning that followed Omari's death. Because a child who calls 911 and asks for help deserves to have that help arrive. Every time. Without exception. Regardless of the complexity of the family situation or the competing demands on a caseworker's caseload or the bureaucratic challenges of an underfunded child protective services system. Omari called. He was 9 years old. And 6 months later, he was dead. Synthia Varela-Casaus was Omari's mother. On December 27, 2013, in the days between Christmas and New Year's, when most families were still gathered together in the particular warm chaos of the holiday season, Synthia Varela-Casaus kicked and stomped her 9-year-old son to death. In the next room, according to the investigation conducted by the Albuquerque Police Department and presented in court, Omari's stepfather was shooting heroin. Omari Varela died in his own home. He died from blunt force trauma injuries consistent with being kicked and stomped. He died from violence inflicted by his own mother. He died 6 months after he had called 911 and asked someone to help him. The case broke open the city of Albuquerque in a way that very few cases in the history of the 2nd Judicial District Court of Bernalillo County ever have. The public reaction was not simply grief, though there was profound and genuine grief. The public reaction was fury, a specific, focused, legitimate fury directed at the systems that had received a 9-year-old child's cry for help and had not responded in a way that kept him alive. In the months following Omari's death, there were vigils, protests, community forums, and legislative hearings. There were calls for the resignation of officials within New Mexico's Children, Youth and Families Department. There were investigations into the agency's handling of the case. There were sweeping calls for reform of the child welfare system in New Mexico, a system that had, in the estimation of many advocates and community members, failed Omari Varela at multiple points over multiple months. Synthia Varela-Casaus was charged in the 2nd Judicial District Court of Bernalillo County. Prosecutors built a case that laid out, with methodical and devastating clarity, the history of violence and neglect in the Varela household, the 911 call that should have triggered protective action, and the events of December 27, 2013. Varela-Casaus eventually entered a guilty plea to 6 counts, including second-degree murder. On May 6, 2016, before Judge Brett Lovelace in the 2nd Judicial District Court of Bernalillo County, Synthia Varela-Casaus was sentenced to 40 years in the New Mexico Corrections Department. 40 years. Of all the sentences handed down in the 10 cases we are covering tonight, it is the longest. It reflects both the severity of what Omari endured and, perhaps, something of the community's insistence that his death not be cheaply valued by the judicial system. Omari's stepfather was separately charged and sentenced for his role in the child's death. In the years since Omari Varela's death, his name has continued to matter in New Mexico policy circles. Legislative proposals aimed at reforming child welfare have been discussed in the context of his case. Advocates who work in the space of child protection frequently cite his story when arguing for increased funding, reduced caseworker caseloads, and stronger mandatory response protocols when children reach out to emergency services. But here is what stays with us most at Cold Case Hour, when we sit with the story of Omari Varela. Not the policy failures, not the bureaucratic shortcomings, not the legislative debates. What stays with us is this: a 9-year-old boy picked up a phone, dialed 911, and asked for help. He did everything right. He did exactly what we tell children to do when they are in danger. He was brave enough, and smart enough, and desperate enough to reach out. And the world did not reach back in time. His name was Omari Varela. He was 9 years old. He called for help. He deserved to be heard. This is one of the most important cases we have ever covered on this channel. If you agree that Omari's story needs to be heard, please like this video, share it with everyone you know, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and drop his name in the comments below. Let the world know that Omari Varela is remembered, that he was seen, that he mattered. Case 9, Christina, Escobeda-Arriaga. The crash on State Road 478. 3rd Judicial District Court, Dona Ana County, Las Cruces, New Mexico. August 10, 2025. On August 10, 2025, it was a Sunday evening in the flat, sun-baked stretch of desert south of Las Cruces, New Mexico, in a small, unincorporated community called Vado, situated along State Road 478 in Dona Ana County. The road runs through one of the most sparsely populated corners of southern New Mexico, where the Chihuahuan Desert extends in every direction and the landscape is defined by a kind of vast, quiet emptiness that can feel either peaceful or desolate, depending on your state of mind. On the evening of August 10, 2025, that road became the site of a tragedy that would shock the region and reopen some of the most difficult conversations in New Mexico's ongoing reckoning with impaired driving. Christina Escobeda-Arriaga was 33 years old and lived in Mesilla Park, a small community adjacent to Las Cruces in Dona Ana County. On the evening of August 10th, she was behind the wheel of a 2007 purple Dodge Charger. The Dona Ana County District Attorney's Office moved quickly. A new grand jury presentation was scheduled for November 4, 2025, and charges were refiled against Escobeda-Arriaga. She entered a not guilty plea. The case is actively proceeding as of the time of this episode's production. There are approximately 1.3 million licensed drivers in the state of New Mexico. Every single day, a portion of those drivers make the choice to get behind the wheel while impaired. Most of the time, they get away with it without incident. They make it home. They pull into the driveway. They go to bed. And the odds they gambled with that night reset for the next time. On August 10, 2025, the odds did not reset. A utility pole on State Road 478 in Vado did not move out of the way. And 2 children, including a 12-year-old girl whose mother was the driver of the car that killed her, did not survive. New Mexico consistently ranks among the top states in the country for alcohol-impaired driving fatalities per capita. It is a statistic that state officials, law enforcement agencies, and public health advocates have been fighting to change for decades. The tools are available: stricter enforcement, expanded DWI courts, more robust public education, greater availability of sober ride alternatives in rural areas where taxis and rideshare services are scarce or non-existent. The will to deploy those tools consistently and adequately is a political and budgetary question that New Mexico's legislature and executive branch revisit every single session. Meanwhile, on State Road 478 in Vado, there is a utility pole that was hit by a purple Dodge Charger on the evening of August 10, 2025. And two families are trying to understand how to live in the aftermath of a Sunday evening that changed everything. Christina Escobeda-Arriaga's case is before the 3rd Judicial District Court of Dona Ana County. Justice for the children who died on August 10, 2025 has not yet arrived. But the court system is moving, and the families of those children, along with the community of southern New Mexico that grieves alongside them, are watching. Thank you for staying with us through this case. Subscribe to Cold Case Hour and share this episode. Every share is a voice raised for the children who can no longer raise their own. Case 10, Alexee Trevizo. The Trash Can at Artesia General. 5th Judicial District Court, Eddy County, Carlsbad, New Mexico, with proceedings before the New Mexico Supreme Court. January 27, 2023. Charged May 10, 2023. Artesia, New Mexico is a small city of approximately 12,000 people in Eddy County in the southeastern part of the state. It is an oil town, like many communities in the Permian Basin that straddles the New Mexico-Texas border. It has the feel of a tight-knit, working-class community, a place where most people know at least something about their neighbors, where the local hospital is the kind of institution that delivers babies and treats injuries, and serves as a community anchor for the surrounding region. Artesia General Hospital has been part of that community for decades. It is not a large facility. It is a regional hospital serving a relatively small population, but it plays an outsized role in the lives of the people who live in and around Artesia, Eddy County, and the surrounding southeast New Mexico oil patch. On January 27, 2023, something happened at Artesia General Hospital that no one in the hospital's history, no administrator, no nurse, no physician, no janitor, no patient, had ever encountered before, and that no one who heard about it in the days that followed could process without a fundamental disruption of the assumptions they carried about basic human behavior. A newborn baby was found dead in a trash can inside a hospital bathroom. Alexee Trevizo was 19 years old. She had come to Artesia General Hospital on the evening of January 27, 2023, with abdominal pain. The clinical picture she presented to hospital staff was consistent with labor, though the full situation, including the fact that she was at or near full term in a pregnancy she had apparently concealed, was not immediately apparent to the medical team when she first arrived. Trevizo was placed in a room and cared for by hospital staff. At some point during her time in the hospital, specifically in a hospital bathroom, she gave birth to a baby boy. The baby was full term, or close to it. He was viable. He had every physical attribute of a newborn who, given appropriate care in a hospital setting, a setting equipped with exactly the resources needed to care for a newborn, could reasonably have been expected to survive and thrive. Alexee Trevizo placed her newborn son in a trash bag and concealed him inside a trash can in the hospital bathroom. She then returned to her hospital room. Hospital staff eventually discovered the baby in the trash can. By the time he was found, he was dead. The case fell under the jurisdiction of the Artesia Police Department and the Eddy County Sheriff's Office, who conducted the initial investigation in coordination with the New Mexico Office of the Medical Investigator. The OMI, the state office responsible for determining cause and manner of death in cases that require investigation, conducted a thorough autopsy and toxicological analysis. Their findings were unambiguous and, given the circumstances, not surprising. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. The cause of death was determined to be consistent with asphyxia. The baby had been alive. On May 10, 2023, Alexee Trevizo was formally charged in the 5th Judicial District Court of Eddy County with first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. She was 19 years old. The charges she faced, first-degree murder of a newborn, carry a potential sentence of life in prison under New Mexico law. The case attracted national and international attention almost immediately. It landed in the complex, emotionally charged landscape of post-Dobbs America, a legal and political environment transformed by the United States Supreme Court's June 2022 decision overturning Roe v. Wade, which returned the question of abortion regulation to individual states and ignited an ongoing national conversation about reproductive rights, bodily autonomy, and the legal treatment of women who experience crisis pregnancies. Some commentators argued that the Trevizo case needed to be understood in that context, as the story of a frightened 19-year-old in a small conservative Texas border community who had concealed a pregnancy and panicked. Others argued, with equal conviction, that the homicide ruling by the Office of the Medical Investigator, the determination that a living baby had been killed, placed the case squarely in the domain of criminal law, whatever one's views on the broader political landscape. Both of those conversations are real. Both of them are happening. And both of them matter. But what matters most to us at Cold Case Hour, tonight, in the context of everything we have covered in this episode, is this. There is a baby boy who was born alive in a hospital bathroom in Ortiz-Chavez, New Mexico, on January 27, 2023. He had 10 fingers and 10 toes and a heartbeat and lungs that were drawing air. He was in a hospital, a place designed specifically to care for new life, staffed by people trained specifically to protect it. And he died in a trash can. In the 5th Judicial District Court, the case proceeded toward trial under District Judge Daniel Rabolt. The Lea and Eddy County District Attorney's Office, under District Attorney Diana Luce, prosecuted the case. But the proceedings hit a significant legal obstacle when the defense challenged the admissibility of certain key pieces of evidence obtained during the investigation. The lower court issued a suppression ruling that impacted evidence prosecutors intended to present at trial. That ruling was appealed by the District Attorney's Office to the New Mexico Supreme Court, which agreed to hear the matter. On September 4, 2025, the New Mexico Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the suppression matter. The justices questioned both sides on the legal standards governing evidence collection in cases like this one, the rights of the defendant against the state's interest in using the best available evidence to pursue a murder charge. The ruling was pending at the time of this episode's production. No trial date had been set, and the entire trajectory of the prosecution hinged on what the Supreme Court decided about the admissibility of the suppressed evidence. Whatever the New Mexico Supreme Court ultimately decides about that evidence, the underlying facts of January 27, 2023, as established by the investigation and the Office of the Medical Investigator, remain what they are. A baby was born alive in a hospital bathroom. A baby was placed in a trash can. A baby died. New Mexico's safe haven law, the same law we discussed in the context of the Alexis Avila case and the Sonia Cristal Jimenez case, would have permitted Alexee Trevizo to surrender her baby at Ortiz-Chavez General Hospital that very night. She was already inside a hospital. The staff who had been caring for her were there. The resources needed to receive a surrendered newborn and ensure his survival were present in that building. The legal protection that would have shielded her from prosecution was available to her under New Mexico law. The baby died in a trash can in a hospital bathroom. The Ortiz-Chavez community was shaken. Eddy County was shaken. True crime audiences across the country and across the world followed the case with a combination of grief, outrage, and the complex mixture of emotions that this particular case, with its layered legal, political, and human dimensions, inevitably generates. The case of Alexee Trevizo remains unresolved in the legal system. The New Mexico Supreme Court has not yet issued its ruling on the suppression matter. A trial has not yet been held. A verdict has not yet been rendered. What we know, what the Office of the Medical Investigator has formally determined, is that a baby died at Ortiz-Chavez General Hospital on January 27, 2023, and that the manner of that death was a homicide. That baby deserved the chance to be cared for. He deserved what every new human being who enters this world deserves, the chance to breathe, to grow, to become someone. He was in a hospital. He was surrounded by people whose entire professional purpose is to sustain and protect life. He got none of what was available to him in that building on that night. His name has not been publicly released. He does not yet have a public identity beyond the clinical facts of his brief existence and the legal case that surrounds his death. But here, on Cold Case Hour, he is not a case number. He is a baby boy who was born alive on January 27, 2023, in Ortiz-Chavez, New Mexico. And his story deserves to be told, and heard, and remembered. We will be watching this case as it continues through the New Mexico Supreme Court and beyond, and we will bring you updates on Cold Case Hour as the legal proceedings develop. Thank you for watching tonight. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour so you never miss an episode. Share this video with someone who needs to hear these stories tonight. Every single child we covered tonight deserves to be remembered. Conclusion. We have spent tonight in some of the darkest corners of human behavior. Inside the stories of 10 children who were failed by the one person the law, biology, and every human moral code assigns as their first and most essential protector. Victoria Martens, who was murdered on her 10th birthday in Albuquerque. The 15-month-old baby girl in Española who died because fentanyl smoke filled the home her mother was supposed to keep safe. The newborn boy in Hobbs who was left in a dumpster in January and survived because a stranger heard him crying. The 18-month-old girl in Albuquerque whose 7-year-old brother watched her die. The baby girl born at Burn Lake in Las Cruces who never got to take a breath outside the cold air of a February morning. The 5-year-old and 9-month-old sons on the Isleta Pueblo who will never grow up. 16-year-old Josue Ruiz, who was shot in an Albuquerque alley and whose teenage killer then pointed at her own son. 9-year-old Omari Varela, who called 911 6 months before his mother killed him and begged for someone to help. The 12-year-old girl in Vado and the 15-year-old beside her who did not survive a Sunday evening crash on State Road 478. And the baby boy in the hospital bathroom in Artesia, who was born into a building full of people trained to save lives and did not survive the night. 10 children, 10 stories, 10 indictments of the choices made by the women who were supposed to love them more than anything else on earth. We do not tell these stories to exploit grief. We tell them because silence is not neutral. Silence, in the face of what was done to these children, is a second abandonment. And these children have been abandoned enough. If you walked with us through all 10 of these cases tonight, you have done something important. You have refused to look away. You have sat with the discomfort and the grief and the anger that these stories demand. That is not nothing. That is, in its own quiet way, a form of witness. And these children deserve witnesses. They deserve to be seen. At Cold Case Hour, that is what we do. We see them. We say their names. We make sure their stories are not buried in old news archives and forgotten case files. We believe that memory is a form of justice, imperfect and insufficient on its own, but real and necessary and worth fighting for. We will keep telling these stories. We will keep saying these names. And we will keep asking the questions that these cases demand. Questions about child welfare systems, about addiction policy, about domestic violence, about the ways communities can and must do better for their most vulnerable members. We need you to be part of that work. Subscribe to Cold Case Hour if you have not already done so. Click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Like this video so the algorithm knows that stories about real victims, told with care and with respect, deserve to be seen by more people. Share this episode on your social media, with your family, with your coworkers, with anyone you know who cares about justice and about children. And in the comments below, we want to hear from you. Which case affected you most tonight? Which name will you be carrying with you when you close this tab? Tell us. We read every comment. We respond to as many as we can. This community is built in those comments, one person at a time, by people who refuse to look away from the hardest stories. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of Cold Case Hour. These children were real. Their lives mattered. And as long as this channel exists, their names will not be forgotten. Good night.